Picture this. The scorching sun beats down mercilessly on the dusty plains of Arizona Territory, 1882. The air shimmers with heat waves that dance like ghosts across the endless desert. In this unforgiving land where only the strongest survive, a young woman's worth is measured not by her heart or her spirit, but by how well she can serve the men around her. But what happens when someone finally sees her true value? What happens when a mysterious stranger rides into town and changes everything with just a few powerful words? If you love stories of courage, redemption, and finding your worth in the most unexpected places, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because this tale of the Old West will take you on an emotional journey you will never forget. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Hartwell ranch as Mary wiped the sweat from her brow, her calloused hands gripping the wooden bucket filled with water from the well. At 22, she had the weathered hands of someone twice her age, each line telling a story of endless chores and thankless labor. "Mary, where's my coffee?" bellowed her father, Thomas Hartwell, from the porch of their modest ranch house. His voice carried the same bitter edge it had held for as long as she could remember. "Coming, Pa," she called back, quickening her pace despite the weight of the water bucket. Thomas Hartwell sat in his worn rocking chair, his graying beard unkempt and his eyes holding the cold distance of a man who had given up on life long ago. When Mary's mother had died in childbirth, something in Thomas had died with her, leaving behind only resentment and the constant reminder that his wife had traded her life for what he saw as a burden. "Took you long enough," he muttered as Mary set down a steaming cup of coffee beside him. "Mrs. Patterson's daughter already has 3 young ones and a husband who provides for her. What do I have? A daughter who can't even find herself a man willing to take her off my hands." Mary's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. "You're 22, Mary. Most women your age are running their own households, not being a drain on their father's resources." Thomas took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. "Can't even make a decent cup of coffee." The word stung, but Mary had built walls around her heart to protect herself from her father's cruelty. She turned to head back to her chores when the sound of approaching hoofbeats caught her attention. A lone rider emerged from the heat haze, sitting tall in his saddle atop a magnificent black stallion. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about his presence. As he drew closer, Mary could see he was a man in his early 30s, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were well made but dusty from travel, and a Colt .45 hung low on his hip with the easy familiarity of a man who knew how to use it. "Morning," the stranger called out as he approached the porch, touching the brim of his hat politely. "Name's Samuel Morrison. I'm looking for work, and I heard in town that you might be hiring hands." Thomas looked the man up and down, his expression skeptical. "Depends on what kind of work you're looking for and what you can do." "I can handle cattle, fix fences, break horses, whatever needs doing on a ranch," Samuel replied, his voice steady and confident. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "Well, I suppose I could use an extra hand," Thomas said slowly. "The drought's been hard on everyone, and I've had to let most of my men go. Can't pay much, but there's a bunk in the barn and 3 meals a day." "That'll do fine," Samuel nodded. As the 2 men talked, Mary continued with her chores, but she found herself stealing glances at the newcomer. There was something different about him, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the space around him. When their eyes met briefly, she felt a strange flutter in her chest that she quickly pushed aside. "Mary," her father's voice cut through her thoughts. "Stop gawking and get back to work. Mr. Morrison doesn't need to see you standing around like a lazy fool." The harsh words hit Mary like a physical blow, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She quickly looked away and hurried toward the chicken coop, but not before she caught a glimpse of Samuel's expression. His jaw had tightened, and something dark had flashed in his eyes. "Is that your daughter?" Samuel asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Unfortunately, yes," Thomas replied with a bitter laugh. 22 years old, and still can't find a husband willing to take her. Been nothing but a burden since the day she was born." Samuel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice level. She seems like a hard worker. Hard worker, maybe. But what good is that in a woman? She should be married with children by now, not draining my resources. Thomas stood up from his chair. Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying. As the two men walked toward the barn, Samuel glanced back toward the chicken coop, where Mary was scattering feed for the hens. Even from a distance, he could see the slump in her shoulders, the way she seemed to make herself smaller, as if trying to disappear entirely. Samuel Morrison had seen a lot of cruelty in his 31 years, but there was something about the casual way Thomas Hartwell spoke about his own daughter that made his blood boil. He had come to this remote corner of Arizona territory to escape his past, to find some measure of peace after years of violence and loss. But watching Mary's father tear her down with his words, Samuel felt the familiar stirring of protective anger that had gotten him into trouble before. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Samuel sat outside the barn, cleaning his rifle. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the distant howl of a coyote. He was lost in thought when he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Mary appeared around the corner of the barn, carrying a plate covered with a checkered cloth. She hesitated when she saw him, as if debating whether to approach. "Evening, Miss Hartwell," Samuel said, setting down his rifle and standing up. "That smells mighty good." I brought you some supper," Mary said quietly, holding out the plate. "Pa said you'd be eating with us, but he fell asleep in his chair after drinking, and I didn't want you to go hungry." Samuel accepted the plate with a grateful nod. "That's very kind of you. Thank you." Mary turned to leave, but Samuel's voice stopped her. "Miss Hartwell." She looked back, her brown eyes wary. "What your father said earlier, about you being a burden?" Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. "He's wrong." Mary's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. "You don't know me," she finally whispered. "I know enough," Samuel replied. "I've been watching you today. You work harder than most men I know, and you do it without complaint. You're kind and thoughtful. Bringing me supper proves that. Your father—" Samuel paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your father is a fool if he can't see what he has right in front of him." Tears gathered in Mary's eyes, and she quickly looked away. "I should go." "Mary," Samuel said, and the sound of her name on his lips made her look back. "You're not a burden. You're a treasure, one that he'll never own because he's too blind to see your worth." The words hung in the air between them like a promise, and Mary felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her, really seen her, and found her valuable. Without another word, she turned and hurried back to the house, her heart pounding with emotions she couldn't name. Behind her, Samuel watched until she disappeared into the shadows, a protective fire burning in his chest. 3 weeks had passed since Samuel Morrison's arrival at the Hartwell ranch, and the dynamic of the small household had begun to shift in subtle but significant ways. Mary found herself looking forward to the brief conversations she shared with Samuel during his meals or when their paths crossed during the day's work. Samuel, for his part, had proven himself to be everything he'd claimed and more. He worked tirelessly under the scorching Arizona sun, repairing fences that had been neglected for months, tending to the cattle with a skill that spoke of years of experience, and even managing to coax life back into the ranch's struggling vegetable garden. But it was the way he treated Mary that truly set him apart from any man she had ever known. "Good morning, Miss Mary," he would say each day, touching his hat respectfully. He never failed to thank her for meals, to compliment her cooking, or to acknowledge her hard work around the ranch. Small gestures, perhaps, but to Mary, they were revolutionary. On this particular morning, the air was thick with the promise of a storm. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of rain, a precious commodity in the drought-stricken territory. Mary was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard raised voices coming from the front porch. Her father's voice, slurred with drink despite the early hour, was arguing with someone. "I don't care what you think you're owed, Patterson. I told you I'd pay when I could." Mary crept closer to the house, staying hidden behind the corner as she listened. "That was 3 months ago, Hartwell," came the reply in a voice she recognized as belonging to Jake Patterson, a local rancher known for his quick temper and quicker fists. "My patience has run out." "And what exactly do you propose I do about it?" Thomas's voice was defiant, but Mary could hear the underlying fear. "Well, I've been thinking about that," Patterson said, and Mary could hear the cruel smile in his voice. "That daughter of yours is getting a bit long in the tooth, but she's still got some years left in her. Might be she could work off your debt." Mary's blood ran cold. She knew exactly what Patterson was suggesting, and it had nothing to do with honest work. "Mary's not part of this," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Everything on this ranch is part of this," Patterson replied. "You owe me $500, Hartwell. That's more money than you'll see in 2 years, assuming this drought ever breaks. But a young woman, well, she could be worth quite a bit to the right buyer." Mary pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Patterson wasn't just talking about making her work off the debt. He was talking about selling her. "I need time to think about it," Thomas said finally. "You've got until tomorrow night," Patterson replied. "After that, I'll be taking what's owed to me, one way or another." Mary heard the sound of boots on the porch steps and quickly ducked back behind the house as Patterson mounted his horse and rode away. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure it could be heard across the entire ranch. She was still standing there, frozen with fear, when Samuel appeared around the corner of the house. "Mary? What's wrong?" His voice was immediately concerned as he took in her pale face and trembling hands. I can't." Mary tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Samuel gently took her by the shoulders, his touch steadying her. "Take a deep breath. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Slowly, haltingly, Mary told him what she had overheard. With each word, Samuel's expression grew darker, the storm clouds in his eyes matching those gathering overhead. "He can't do that," Samuel said when she finished, his voice deadly quiet. "No father has the right to sell his daughter like livestock." "You don't understand," Mary said, tears streaming down her face. "Pa owes money all over town. If he can't pay Patterson, we'll lose the ranch anyway. And if Patterson decides to take what he wants by force—" She shuddered, unable to finish the thought. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed what Mary had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but filled with steel. "That's not going to happen. I won't let it. Samuel, you don't understand what you're up against. Patterson has men, and he's not afraid to use violence to get what he wants." "Neither am I," Samuel replied, and something in his tone made Mary look at him more closely. For just a moment, she saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes, a glimpse of the man he had been before he came to their ranch. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, striking the dusty ground with tiny puffs of dust. Within minutes, the drops became a downpour, the first real rain they had seen in months. "Come on," Samuel said, taking Mary's hand. "Let's get inside before we're soaked through." They ran for the barn, laughing despite the gravity of their conversation as the rain soaked them to the skin. Inside the barn, they stood dripping and breathing hard, the sound of rain on the roof creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. "Mary," Samuel said, his voice soft in the dim light of the barn, "I need you to know something." She looked up at him, water droplets clinging to her eyelashes. "I've done things in my past that I'm not proud of. I came here to escape that life, to find some peace. But if Patterson thinks he can hurt you, he's going to discover that some men are better left undisturbed. Samuel, I don't want you to get hurt because of me." He reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb brushing away a raindrop from her cheek. "Mary, you're worth fighting for. You're worth protecting. Don't you see that?" The intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at her, made Mary's heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I've never had anyone fight for me before." "Well, you do now," Samuel said firmly. "And I promise you this. Patterson will not lay a hand on you. Not while I'm breathing." Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, lightning illuminating the barn in brief, stark flashes. But inside, in the warm darkness, Mary felt safer than she had in years. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand between her and the cruelties of the world. As the rain continued to fall, washing the dust from the parched earth, Mary began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. Maybe she didn't have to accept being treated as a burden. Maybe she really was the treasure that Samuel claimed she was. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was coming. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the air clean and fresh with the scent of wet earth. For the first time in months, there were puddles of precious water scattered across the ranch yard, and the cattle gathered around them eagerly. Mary woke before dawn, as was her habit, but instead of the usual dread that accompanied her mornings, she felt something different stirring in her chest. Samuel's words from the night before echoed in her mind. "You're worth fighting for." She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen to start breakfast, but she was surprised to find Samuel already there, sitting at the worn wooden table with a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. "You're up early," Mary said, moving to the stove to start cooking. "Couldn't sleep," Samuel replied, his voice thoughtful. "Been doing some thinking about our conversation yesterday." Mary's hand stilled on the skillet. "Samuel, I've been thinking too, and I don't want you to do anything dangerous on my account. Maybe I should just—" "No." Samuel's voice was firm as he stood up and moved to stand beside her. "Mary, look at me." She turned to face him, and he gently took her hands in his. "I need you to understand something. What your father is considering, what Patterson is demanding, it's not just wrong, it's evil. And if good people don't stand up to evil, then evil wins." "But what if you get hurt? What if—" Samuel squeezed her hands gently. "Mary, I've been running from my past for 2 years now. Running from the man I used to be, from the things I've done. But maybe it's time I stopped running and started using the skills I have for something good." Before Mary could ask what he meant, they heard the sound of her father's heavy footsteps on the stairs. Samuel quickly released her hands and moved back to his seat as Thomas Hartwell entered the kitchen, looking haggard and smelling of whiskey. "Coffee," Thomas grunted, slumping into his chair. Mary poured him a cup with shaking hands, her mind still reeling from her conversation with Samuel. As she set the cup down, her father grabbed her wrist roughly. "I need to talk to you later," he said, his grip tight enough to bruise. "About our situation." Samuel's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up abruptly, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. "I think you can let go of her now." Thomas looked up, his eyes narrowing. "This is between me and my daughter, Morrison." "Not when you're hurting her, it isn't," Samuel replied, his voice deadly calm. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the kitchen, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Thomas released Mary's wrist and leaned back in his chair. "You're awfully protective of someone else's property, Morrison." "Mary isn't property," Samuel said, each word precise and clear. "She's a human being, and she deserves to be treated as such." Thomas laughed bitterly. "You've been here 3 weeks, and you think you know everything about my situation? About what I owe and to whom?" "I know enough," Samuel replied. "I know that selling your daughter to pay your debts makes you no better than the men who trade in human misery." "You self-righteous." Thomas started to rise from his chair, but Samuel's hand moved to rest on the grip of his Colt. "I wouldn't," Samuel said quietly. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Mary stood frozen between the two men, her heart pounding as she realized how quickly the situation was escalating. "Samuel, please," she whispered. He looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. "It's all right, Mary. Your father and I are just having a conversation about respect." Thomas settled back into his chair, but his eyes never left Samuel's face. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I do," Samuel replied. "I'm dealing with a man who's so consumed by his own bitterness that he's willing to sacrifice his daughter's life to save his own skin." The sound of approaching horses cut through the tension, and Mary moved to the window to look outside. Her blood ran cold as she saw Jake Patterson riding up to the house with 3 other men, all of them armed. "He's here," she whispered. Samuel moved to stand beside her at the window, his expression grim as he assessed the situation. "Mary, I want you to go upstairs and stay there until this is over. I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "You're not leaving me alone," Samuel said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're trusting me to handle this. Can you do that?" Mary looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw something there that gave her courage. "Yes." "Good girl. Now go." Mary reluctantly headed for the stairs, but she paused at the bottom step. "Samuel." He turned to look at her. "Be careful." He smiled, and for a moment, the dangerous man she had glimpsed was replaced by the gentle cowboy who had shown her kindness. "I will." As Mary disappeared upstairs, Samuel turned to face Thomas. "Last chance, Hartwell. You can walk out there and tell Patterson that your daughter isn't for sale, or I can tell him myself." Thomas looked at Samuel for a long moment, then at the bottle of whiskey on the counter, then back at Samuel. "You really think you can take on 4 armed men?" "I guess we're about to find out," Samuel replied, checking his gun one final time before heading for the door. Outside, Patterson and his men had dismounted and were standing in a loose semicircle in front of the porch. Patterson himself was a big man with cruel eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Morning, Hartwell," Patterson called out as Thomas and Samuel emerged from the house. "I trust you've had time to consider my proposition." "I have," Thomas replied, his voice shaky. "And—" Thomas looked at Samuel, then back at Patterson. For a moment, Mary's future hung in the balance, dependent on the courage of a man who had spent years drowning his sorrows in whiskey. "The answer is no," Thomas said finally, his voice growing stronger. "My daughter isn't for sale." Patterson's smile faded. "That's unfortunate, Hartwell, because that means you still owe me $500, and I don't see any money." "Then I guess you'll have to wait," Samuel said, stepping forward. Patterson's eyes shifted to Samuel, taking in the way he stood, the position of his gun, the calm confidence in his bearing. "And you are?" "Samuel Morrison. I work here." "Well, Mr. Morrison, this doesn't concern you." "When it involves Mary, it concerns me," Samuel replied. Patterson studied Samuel more carefully, and something in the cowboy's stance seemed to give him pause. "You know, Morrison, you look familiar. Have we met before?" Samuel's expression didn't change, but Mary, watching from the upstairs window, saw his hand move slightly closer to his gun. "I don't think so." Patterson mused. "Well, no matter. The fact remains that Hartwell owes me money, and if he can't pay, then you'll have to find another way to collect," Samuel interrupted, "because Mary Hartwell is under my protection now." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Patterson's men shifted nervously. There was something about Samuel Morrison that made experienced gunmen uneasy, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. "Your protection?" Patterson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And just who do you think you are to offer protection to anyone?" Samuel smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Why don't you ask around town? I'm sure someone will remember the name Morrison." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Patterson's eyes. He looked at Samuel more carefully, taking in the worn grip of his gun, the way he stood with the easy confidence of a man who had faced death and survived. "Boys," Patterson said to his men, "I think we might want to reconsider our approach here." But before anyone could respond, the sound of more horses approaching caught everyone's attention. A group of 5 riders crested the hill, and Mary's heart sank as she recognized the leader, Sheriff Coleman, a man known to be in Patterson's pocket. "Well, well," Patterson said, his confidence returning. "Looks like the cavalry has arrived." Samuel's jaw tightened as he realized the odds had just shifted dramatically against him. But as he looked up at the window where Mary was watching, her face pale with fear, he knew that no matter what happened next, he would not let her down. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Mary's fate, but the kind of man Samuel Morrison would choose to be. Sheriff Coleman dismounted slowly, his hand resting casually on his gun as he surveyed the scene. He was a thin man with a graying mustache and eyes that had seen too much corruption to maintain any pretense of justice. "Morning, Jake," Coleman said to Patterson. "Heard you might be having some trouble collecting what's owed to you." "Nothing I can't handle, Sheriff," Patterson replied, though his eyes never left Samuel. "Just a simple matter of debt collection." Samuel stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority that made everyone present take notice. "Sheriff, I'm Samuel Morrison. I work for Mr. Hartwell here, and I'm here to tell you that there's not going to be any trouble today." Coleman's eyes narrowed as he studied Samuel. "Morrison, Morrison," he repeated the name slowly, as if trying to place it. "You know, that name does sound familiar." "I'm sure it does," Samuel replied evenly. From the upstairs window, Mary watched the standoff with growing dread. She could see the tension in Samuel's shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his gun. She had no idea what his past held, but it was clear that these men recognized something in him that made them wary. "Sheriff," Thomas Hartwell spoke up, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "I want to make it clear that my daughter is not part of any debt arrangement. She's not for sale, trade, or any other form of payment." Coleman looked surprised. "That's so, Tom? Because Jake here tells me you were considering a different arrangement yesterday." "Yesterday I was drunk and desperate," Thomas replied. "Today I'm sober and I've remembered that I'm still Mary's father. She's not leaving this ranch with anyone." Patterson's face darkened. "You can't just change your mind, Hartwell. A deal's a deal." "There was no deal," Samuel interjected. "There was a threat made against an innocent woman, and that threat ends here." "And just who's going to stop me?" Patterson demanded, his patience finally snapping. "You. One man against all of us." Samuel smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Mary's blood run cold. "Jake, I think it's time you knew exactly who you're dealing with." He took a step forward, and his entire demeanor changed. Gone was the gentle cowboy who had shown Mary kindness. In his place stood a man who radiated danger like heat from a forge. "My name is Samuel Morrison," he said, his voice carrying across the yard with deadly clarity. "Some of you might know me better as Deadeye Morrison from down in Texas." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Patterson's men took an involuntary step backward, and even Sheriff Coleman's hand moved away from his gun. "That's impossible," Patterson breathed. "Deadeye Morrison is he's dead," Samuel finished. "No, Jake. Just tired. Tired of killing, tired of running, tired of being the man everyone fears. I came here to find peace, to maybe become someone better than I was." He looked up at the window where Mary was watching, and his expression softened for just a moment. "I found something here worth protecting, something worth being better for." But Samuel continued, his voice hardening again as he turned back to Patterson. "If you think my desire for peace makes me weak, you're about to learn just how wrong you are." Mary had heard stories of Deadeye Morrison, whispered tales of a gunfighter who had never lost a draw, who had cleaned up 3 different towns in Texas before disappearing 2 years ago. She had never imagined that the gentle man who brought her wildflowers and complimented her cooking was the same person. "Now," Samuel continued, "here's how this is going to work. You're going to get back on your horses and ride away. Mr. Hartwell will pay his debt when he can, in money, not in human lives. And if we don't?" Patterson asked, though his bravado was clearly forced. Samuel's hand moved to rest on his gun, and the movement was so smooth and natural that it was like watching water flow. "Then you'll discover why they call me Deadeye." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Mary could see the calculation in Patterson's eyes, weighing his desire for revenge against the very real possibility of death. Finally, Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. "Jake, maybe we should reconsider this whole situation. You're backing down," Patterson demanded. "I'm being practical," Coleman replied. "Deadeye Morrison killed 12 men in Tombstone without taking a scratch. I didn't become sheriff to commit suicide." Patterson looked around at his men and saw the same fear reflected in their faces. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to back toward his horse. "This isn't over, Morrison," he said as he mounted up. "Yes, it is," Samuel replied quietly. "Because if I see you on this ranch again, If I hear that you've threatened Mary or her father in any way, I'll come looking for you. And Jake, when I come looking for someone, I always find them." The threat was delivered in such a calm, matter-of-fact tone that it was somehow more terrifying than any shouted challenge could have been. Patterson and his men rode away without another word, leaving only dust clouds and the memory of their fear behind. As soon as they were out of sight, Samuel's shoulders sagged, and he suddenly looked older, wearier. Thomas Hartwell approached him cautiously. "Morrison." "Samuel, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Samuel replied. "Just remember that your daughter is worth more than any debt, more than any amount of money. She's a treasure, and it's time you started treating her like one." Thomas nodded, shame clear in his eyes. "You're right. I've been a terrible father. It's not too late to change that," Samuel said. Mary appeared in the doorway, having crept downstairs during the confrontation. She looked at Samuel with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something deeper that she was only beginning to understand. "Samuel," she said softly. He turned to her, and once again he was just the gentle man who had shown her kindness. "It's all right, Mary. You're safe." She walked toward him slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Dead-eye Morrison?" He winced slightly. "That's not who I am anymore. That's not who I want to be." "Then who do you want to be?" she asked. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, seeing the courage in her eyes, the strength that had been hidden beneath years of her father's cruelty. "I want to be the man who's worthy of you." Mary felt tears spring to her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Samuel Morrison, you already are." As the sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, Mary Hartwell finally understood what it meant to be valued, to be protected, to be loved. And Samuel Morrison, the man who had once been known as one of the deadliest gunfighters in the West, discovered that the greatest victory wasn't won with bullets, but with the courage to stand up for what was right. 6 months later, Mary Morrison stood in the same spot where she had once felt worthless and alone, but now she wore a simple gold band on her finger and a smile that could light up the entire territory. Samuel had kept his promise. He had become a man worthy of her, and she had discovered that she had always been the treasure he claimed she was. The drought had broken, the ranch was prospering, and Thomas Hartwell had found his way back to being a father his daughter could be proud of. But most importantly, Mary had learned that her worth wasn't determined by what others thought of her, but by what she knew to be true in her own heart. In the vast desert of the Old West, where survival often meant becoming hard and cruel, two wounded souls had found healing in each other. And in a world that often seemed determined to break the spirit of anyone who dared to dream of something better, Mary and Samuel had proven that love, courage, and the willingness to fight for what's right could overcome even the harshest circumstances. As the sun set over the Arizona territory, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Mary Morrison knew that she was no longer a burden to anyone. She was exactly what Samuel had always said she was, a treasure beyond price, finally in the hands of someone who understood her true value. If this story of courage, redemption, and finding your worth touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales from the Old West. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be seen as the treasure they truly are, and let us know in the comments what story you'd like to hear next. Until next time, remember, your worth isn't determined by how others see you, but by the truth of who you are inside.